Hello, everyone. Welcome to the 11th episode of Truth Tracker, a podcast dedicated to combating misinformation on various issues within the political sphere of the United States of America. I just want to start off by thanking everyone for tuning into today's episode. It definitely means a lot to see everyone's support, especially as we've been continuing to operate the podcast. And so, with that being said, first off, if you've enjoyed any of our past content, please make sure to subscribe to the podcast as well as like any previous videos that you have enjoyed. That would definitely mean a lot, as well as turn on post notifications. That way, you can be notified anytime that we upload any one of our new weekly episodes. And so, with that being said, this episode is going to function virtually the same as it's been virtually the last, or as it's been running the past couple of weeks. We're going to bust 10 myths regarding U.S. student debt with analysis, explanations, and sources. And then we are going to have our weekly civic engagement segment where we talk about the importance of voting. And so, with that being said, for this episode, our focus is going to be obviously on U.S. student debt, as it is a very important issue right now in the political scene of the United States of America, and there's many solutions being proposed to tackle this issue. So it's important to make sure that we are consuming accurate information regarding it. And so, with that being said, let's get into the 11th episode, which is going to be on student debt on a Truth Tracker today. So, our first myth is that student loans are always a good investment. Now, many people believe that taking on student loans is always a sort of effective decision because higher education generally leads to, better job prospects and or higher salaries, and a great way to pay for higher education is through student loans. Now, while a degree can provide significant benefits, the reality is that not all degrees actually result in a return on investment that justifies um, taking student loans in order to pay for that degree. Factors such as the field of study, job market conditions, and the cost of education can drastically affect whether student loans should be taken or not be taken. And so, at the end of the day, this myth can lead students to underestimate the financial risks associated with taking on, large amounts of debt, because a lot of the times many degrees don't necessarily need or many degrees don't usually result in the return on investment that justifies taking such a large magnitude of student loans. And so therefore it's important to evaluate each scenario on a case by case basis to determine whether student loans are a good investment. It's very hard to say that student loans are always a good investment on a sort of widespread scale, because there have been many research studies that have been released that show that many degrees don't often provide the sort of return value that is often that student loans are often that student loans are often giving. And so therefore it's important to understand that on a widespread scale, student loans are not always a good investment. And we got this information from the Georgetown University Center on Education and the Workforce. And so with that being said, this myth is not true. Student loans are not always a good investment. Our next myth is that student debt is only an issue for low-income students. Now, many people believe that student debt primarily affects students of a low socioeconomic status, but this is actually not the case. There's many times where middle and upper middle class families, as well as, upper class families, often have to take on debt to pay for higher education, especially, if they're getting their degrees from private institutions, or maybe pursuing graduate education where the money can start to accumulate sorry, I can't speak, and would require the need for student debt in order to finance those educations. And so data actually shows that borrowers from higher income brackets also carry significant student debt, particularly those that attended elite and private universities. And so it's important to understand that this issue affects a diverse income levels, because it's not often or it's important to understand that people of a low socioeconomic status are not the only people that take student loans. There's been many instances where upper middle class as well as upper class families often do take on substantial student debt to pay for post secondary education, and so it's important to recognize that this issue can affect the diverse income levels, which can help formulate. And so if we recognize this issue, we can start to formulate more inclusive policies that provide relief and support to all student borrowers. So it's important to understand that student debt is not only just an issue for low income students; it can also become an issue for middle class, upper middle class, and upper class families. And we got this information from the Federal Reserve. Our next myth is that all students can afford to pay back their loans. Now, the assumption that all graduates can easily repay their loans fails to account for, the harsh reality of the current job market. Furthermore, many students graduate into an economy where jobs may be scarce or low paying or tumultuous, and which makes it difficult to keep up with loan payments. Additionally, even graduates with stable jobs may face high living costs in certain areas of the country, which limit their income that they can sort of put aside to pay back their student loans. And so this myth can perpetuate a lack of understanding about the economic challenges faced by many graduates, because there's a lot of data out there that shows that many students struggle with paying back student loans due to the high cost of living in their areas, or scarce jobs, or jobs that have low wages, which often prevent them from keeping up with loan payments. And so it's important to acknowledge that economic conditions can significantly impact a graduate's ability to repay loans, and it's important to acknowledge that because it would allow us to formulate better policies to acknowledge the student debt issues, such as income driven repayment plans or financial literacy programs to help borrowers or to help graduates manage their student loan debt more effectively. And we got this information from the Brookings Institution. Our next myth is that student debt is considered to be a personal failure. Now, this narrative has become a popular one in our country, and it represents the sort of personal failure and it sort of states how people that have to have to take on student debt it's a personal failure for them, but it often ignores the systemic factors at play, such as rising tuition costs, inadequate state funding for public universities, as well as the increasing necessity of advancing degrees in many fields. And so many students are forced to take on debt in order to access these higher educational opportunities in a post secondary setting that are becoming very critical in today's job market. And so it's important to understand that student debt is not a personal failure, because that belief that it is a personal failure fosters shame and guilt among borrowers, and which often prevents them from seeking help or discussing their financial struggles open. And so by recognizing that student debt exists and is not a personal failure, it can allow us to take steps to formulate better solutions to the issue. And so at the end of the day, student debt is not a personal failure because there's many systemic factors at play, such as rising college costs, high cost of living, inadequate state funding for public universities, as well as the sort of increasing necessity that you need a degree to succeed in the job market. And so, or the increasing necessity for advanced degrees in many fields, such as engineering or medicine or law. And so, with that being said, this myth is not true. Student debt is not a personal failure, and we got this information from the Center for American Progress. Our next myth is that most student loan borrowers are in default. Now, contrary to the belief that many borrowers do default on their loans, recent statistics that have been released actually indicate that only about 10% of graduates that have borrowed student loans are in default. Now, many graduates are able to keep up with their payments through the use, for example, of income-driven repayment loans or maybe deferments, and so this sort of misconception is simply not true and can actually create unnecessary anxiety and stigma which can discourage individuals from seeking help or utilizing available resources. And so it's important to sort of dispel this myth that most student loan borrowers aren't in default, as they are not. Only about 10% of them are, and many borrowers are able to keep up with their payments through using various strategies. And so this sort of widespread myth that most student loan borrowers are in default is simply not true. Most of them are paying off their student loan debt very well and are yet they're able to pay them off using various strategies. And so it's important to highlight this fact because it would allow us to create a more supportive environment that encourages dialogue about repayment strategies and financial planning. And we got this information from the U.S. Department of Education. Our next myth is that student debt only affects recent graduates. Now, this sort of narrative that only recent graduates face student debt often overlooks the fact that many borrowers actually continue to pay their student debt when they're in their 30s or 40s or 50s or even when they're older. Some have maybe taken on debt for graduate or professional degrees that they've used to, advance their current fields, while others may actually have returned to school later in life to enhance their skills in their respective field or maybe change careers. And this has resulted in an increasing number of older borrowers that, continue to, or older number of graduates and borrowers that continue to repay their loans for a long time after they graduate school in a post-secondary setting. And so it's important to understand that this issue does not only just affect recent graduates that have, very recently graduated college and are in their 20s or 30s, or just are in their 20s and are maybe a couple years separate from college. Oftentimes many people, as they get older and maybe reach retirement age, are still paying their student loans because of the large magnitude of student loans that they've had to take. And so it's important to recognize that student debt does not only affect recent graduates, it affects people of all different ages, of all different time gaps from their graduation. And we got this information from the Pew Research Center. Our next myth is that student loans are the biggest cause of financial crisis. Now, it is true that student loans contribute to individual financial struggles, they are not the sole cause of broader financial crises. For example, other factors such as the housing market collapse in 2008, credit bubbles, as well as wage stagnation can also play critical roles in sort of causing student loans to be the biggest cause of financial crisis during, economic downturns. And so oversimplifying these causes of financial crises can lead to misguided policy responses from the government. And so it's important to understand that oftentimes, if you're under a financial crisis, it's not just because of student debt. There can be many different issues, such as, economic struggles, a lack of jobs, low wages, inflation, high costs of living, and whatnot. And so this can lead to better policies, and that can consider the interconnectedness of these various economic pressures when addressing the student debt issue. And so at the end of the day, this myth that student loans are the biggest cause of financial crisis is not true, and we got this information from the Federal Reserve Bank of New York. And so, one commonality that you can see in all of these myths are the types of sources that we're using. All these sources that we've used are very accurate, verifiable, and reputable sources that produce accurate information in the world of student debt and education financing. And so it's important to, when you're dealing with such a topic such as student debt, which has a lot of misinformation on it in the media, it's important to first off make sure you're consuming your information on this issue from very reputable sources, as well as always cross-checking and fact-checking the data just to make sure that you are consuming accurate information. Our next myth is that you can't negotiate your student loan terms. Now, many graduates actually assume that once they accept a loan, the terms of their student loans are often set in stone. However, while federal loans, for example, have standardized terms, some some private lenders and some private lenders do allow for negotiation regarding interest rates and repayment options. And so, furthermore, there are also a wide variety of loans that do include refinancing. And so it's important for graduates to understand that they have more leverage than they realize, especially if they demonstrate good credit history or maybe financial hardship. And so this myth, for example, if perpetuated, can create this sort of sense of helplessness among borrowers. And so it's important to educate them regarding the potential for renegotiation and refinancing to empower them to seek better loan terms, which can lead to reduced payments as well as overall debt. And so it's important to sort of understand that graduates do have the ability to renegotiate their student loan terms in certain loans that they are in. And so this could also, encourage the amount of options that borrowers have to repay their loans, as well as allowing them to engage more actively with their lenders. And so this sort of myth that they cannot negotiate their student, or that this sort of myth that you cannot negotiate your student loan terms is simply not true. And we got this information from the Consumer Financial Protection Bureau. Our next myth is that student loan forgiveness is easy to get. Now, while programs like the Public Service Loan Forgiveness Fund exist to provide relief, the reality is that many graduates find the eligibility requirements complex and very challenging to navigate, and student loan forgiveness is very hard to receive as a larger number of applicants are initially denied forgiveness due to paperwork issues or maybe a lack of compliance with program requirements. And so this myth can lead to frustration and disillusionment, among borrowers. And so it's important to create greater transparency about the application process in order to ensure that student loan for people that have the access to student loan forgiveness are aware of it, as well as making it more accessible for others. So this myth is simply not true, and we got this information from the Government Accountability Office. Our final myth is that all colleges and universities offer similar financial aid packages. Now, financial aid packages can vary widely between institutions, and they're often influenced by factors like institutional endowments, state funding, as well as the financial aid policies of very individual colleges. For example, some colleges may offer substantial need-based aid, while others may primarily rely on loans. And so this can result in various colleges and universities offering, different financial aid packages. And so it's important for every student applying to college to make sure that they are researching each college's financial aid package to make sure that they're making the best financial decision for them, as the sort of myth that all colleges offer very similar financial aid packages is not true, as many colleges may offer, scholarships. Some colleges may not offer scholarships, or some may cover need-based aid while others may not. Some may rely on loans, or in some way other rely on grants, and there's a lot of variety. And so it's important for people to understand that this myth that all colleges and universities offer similar financial aid packages is simply not true. And so with that being said, that wraps up our misinformation segment, where we busted 10 myths regarding the United States student debt. And so with that being said, here is now our weekly civic engagement episode, or a segment. And so now, as we get closer to the election, it's again important to understand that you should vote, because it's you should vote in this election because it's a part of your civic duty and your civic rights as an American, to vote and make sure your voice is heard. Especially an election that is considered to be very important. It's important that everyone gets out there and votes, no matter what party or candidate you support. It's very important that you exercise your right and your voice, and make sure that you're illustrating your political beliefs to elected officials in the United States of America. Many people have died for your right to vote, and so it's important to honor their sacrifice and make sure that we do end up voting, as it allows us to hold our elected officials accountable and propose effective policies. And so, if you're not registered to vote already, make sure you vote and make sure you show up at the polls in order to make sure that your voice is being heard in this election, and that your voice is heard and your voice is heard when determining the future of this country. And so, at the end of the day, no matter what candidate, policies, or vision or what party you support, it's important that you get out there to your local polling station, and you make sure that your vote is casted. And so, yeah, with that being said, if voting is also a great way to hold elected officials accountable and make sure that your beliefs, your values, your ideas about politics and various issues, for example, are on policies, is being heard within the United States of America. For example, if you feel passionate about topics like student debt, it's important that you get out there to the polls and vote in order to make sure that your views on this issue are being heard by your elected officials. So, with that being said, like we say over and over again, it's very important to vote. If you have any questions regarding the voter registration process and whatnot, please make sure to drop that in the comments and we will definitely be sure to answer them. And so, with that being said, that should be it for today's episode, everyone. Thank you so much for tuning in. If you enjoyed it, please make sure to like this episode as well as subscribe to the podcast and turn on post notifications. That way you can be notified anytime we upload any one of our weekly episodes. And this episode, we busted 10 myths regarding U.S. Student debt, as well as had our weekly civic engagement segment. And so, yep, with that being said, that should be it for today's episode. Thank you, everyone, for tuning in. Have a great day.